Religion has been dying in America for the past 40 years. Secularism is the new norm. Postmodernism and the idea that you can make your own truth is a new burgeoning idea. But what about going back to the foundation of Western civilization, the Bible? I've decided we want to record a series of podcasts focusing on that, and I'm honored to have on our very first program Yoni Kayman, who comes from Israel. He lives as a rabbi and a businessman living in Israel, and he came to answer all of my questions concerning the Bible. Okay, I thought we would talk a little bit about what we're going to talk about. So I've been thinking for several months that I would love to do a religious series. We're going to call it either the people of faith or we the people of God or something like that. The people who believe in God, who are religious, and who have studied the Bible. And it was my good fortune to come across Yoni. Thank you so much for joining me, Yoni.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, and I didn't know when you were on before, you were a Jewish rabbi, and you've been teaching religion and the Old Testament for most of your adult life.
Yes, most of my adult life. I'm a businessman. So about 15 years ago, I started a company. But prior to that, I was teaching Jewish values, Jewish philosophy, running some programming for nonprofit organization. I studied many years in what we call yeshiva, which is a Talmudic institute teaching all about the Torah, the Bible, both the written and the oral texts.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that what I've noticed has happened in our society is most people will say they believe in God, but they're not actively attending a church. Obviously, the United States of America was founded on Christian beliefs and ideals and separation between church and state, but still, one nation under God was the primary value that we attested, and we wanted to have religious liberties. But it seems like we've been moving in this direction where we relegate the Bible and God to the sidelines. And it seems like a big part of what people want to believe today is that the self, their personal identity, should be the top of that pyramid, not loving, serving God or finding their calling from God, but worshiping the self. And I think we do that at our peril, and we don't learn enough from the Bible and the teachings that built our Western civilization. And that's causing a lot of problems. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. So I'll tell you, first of all, I think it's very important that in order to start the conversation that we kind of define our terms.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about God and you're saying that most people believe in God, I'm just going to define my terms so that we can, be on the same page.
Yeah.
Start with the most basic concept of God. God being the creator of the universe. Most people, when they look around the world, and they see the intricacies and they see the wisdom that is involved in every molecule and every cell and every organism and every plant and every human being. I mean, most people with some sort of a logic, some sort of a thought out, and they actually think about it, they believe that it was by design, right? It's difficult to say that this was no design involved, and all of a sudden here you are in like Utah, standing on top of the mountains, you're like looking at the world, and they're like, no one designed this.
Yeah. It's
tough.
hard to question intelligent design.
Right.
Yeah.
So intelligent design, I would say, is the basis, starting point of a conversation about God.
Mm-hmm.
Then there's the next level, and I would agree with you that most people do believe in that. The next level is, is God defining God as a being that's involved in the world, involved in the history of the world, not just, intelligent design stepping away and then mankind or the world, the creations that are within the world kind of taking over.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where it gets tricky, because people don't want to lose control. They want to be in control.
Mm-hmm.
And they want to define themselves in that sense. A lot of people define themselves as God.
Yeah.
So when we're talking about the creator, nobody really defines himself as God, right?
Mm-hmm.
Not nowadays, maybe in ancient history, Pharaoh, you know. But nowadays, the challenge is, do I believe that I am in full control, or can I actually bow my head and say, hey, like I am a very small part of a much bigger picture?
Mm-hmm. And there's gradations where certain people believe that, yeah, God is number one. I'm the co-pilot. And some people believe, well, yeah, God has his place, but I'm mostly in charge here. And then some people are like, no, I can be whatever gender I want. I can identify with whatever I want as far as my values. There's not a values hierarchy. There's certain value that we should just treat every culture the same. And essentially, this book, the Bible, and the Word of God is old ancient folklore, and let's ignore that and let's practice postmodernism as sort of our structural foundation for our civilization. What do you think happens as we do that?
Well, I think it's been tried many times before. I think many societies just unravel around, when it comes to relative morality. When you make up what's moral, what's right and wrong, you end up derailing society because, the human being is made up of this, I would say, these two different wills and desires that every human being has. One is a very self-centered, very short-term, immediate minded kind of push or inside of us saying, okay, just like take as much as you can today because tomorrow you're not going to be here.
Mm-hmm.
Eat, drink, and be merry because tomorrow you're gone, right?
Yeah.
And that's something that every single human being has. And then on the other side, we have something inside of us that I like to refer to as the soul. It's a wisdom that was put inside of us. The soul, again, defining the terms because people can get derailed with the conversation if I say the soul and you think of something else. So
Mm-hmm.
we'll talk about the wisdom that a human being has, and that wisdom has the ability to utilize and use and control the more base values of the person's self, right? And say, wait 1 second, like it's a good idea for you to get up early today. It's a good idea for you to work hard and accomplish something,
Mm-hmm.
even if you don't feel like it, right? Actually, the carrot at the end of that is big,
Mm-hmm.
and it gets it motivated and it gets us motivated, and then we end up, short term versus long term is in simplistic terms, the difference between the body and the soul is very much, the physical versus the spiritual, short term gratification, instant gratification versus long term gratification, something that's more meaningful, more powerful, bigger than just what's here right now.
Yeah.
So if you make up your own morals, then where do you think it's going to come from? In all likelihood, it's going to come from that short-term instant gratification, that motivation of like, hey, let me just grab as much as I can. Let me get as much money as I can. Let me step on as many people as I can because like that's going to make me bigger.
Mm-hmm.
So society requires real morals and values in order to have a long-term success.
Yeah. Yeah. I think you nailed it. And that's what you see in the Bible. That's what you see in the book of Genesis. It's the beginning of the rules that make a society
100%.
work. And I think I decided when we got our house, I wanted to put the 10 commandments on the wall. And I just wanted to tell my kids. So these commandments were inscribed on a tablet Moses took up to Mount Sinai, and God put them there. Moses didn't come up with them. God put them there. And they're ordered, and the first one is
Believing in God.
believing in God, believing there's one God. Don't worship other gods, and that God is a jealous God. He doesn't like you to go off and worship other things. And what does that mean? Like when you start with that, I mean, what does that mean to you?
So right away, the Ten Commandments already brings us into not only the fact that God created the world, but the fact that God is involved in the world, right? The first one of the Ten Commandments is like, I am your God who took you out of Egypt. God is talking to the Jewish people immediately after we left Egypt and had 210 years of slavery. And these were broken people. These were people that did not have proper education. They did not have real values in their homes. They did not have homes. They
They're
had broken
essentially
homes.
Egyptian slaves.
They were low level
Yeah.
Egyptian slaves.
And how
And
many generations were they in Egypt, approximately?
well, it was 210 years. The generations at that time, I mean, let's say Moses was a grandson. His grandfather came into Egypt,
Hmm.
but he lived a long time. In other words, Moses, when he started the biblical story, he was already 80 years old.
Yeah.
So it was, how many generations? There were, at least four generations in Egypt, maybe in the way of, when they were slaves. There were at least four or five generations, and it in all likelihood there were probably, if you can see many, maybe many came out of very few. So either it was very, people had many children at that time,
Yeah.
and the Jewish people definitely suffered for a long period of time. But the people that were actually coming out of Egypt were, they were not taught the basic values that we just take for granted today.
Yeah. And Egyptian society, and I think this is important for everybody to understand, all of society was the strong dominate the weak. And that was the norm.
Yeah.
Like if you were the stronger tribe, of course you're going to go over and conquer your weaker enemy. It's not like, oh, let's be compassionate to them. That's just how the ancient world worked. And if you look at
Until recently.
yeah,
not
really,
not, not so
really,
ancient.
really not that long ago, that's
And
just
still
how
in
it
some
worked.
society, it's like,
And
the stronger you are, the more you could take advantage of other people, the more respect you get.
yeah, and people were divided into tribes, and I don't know how much affiliation after 200 years even the Hebrews had with their ancient past or their ancestors of Joseph and his brothers being in Egypt, but obviously it wasn't enough for the Pharaoh to recognize their tribe as being special and given the status that the Pharaoh gave him. But I guess that brings me to my question. How much of the book of Genesis do the Jewish people interpret as allegory compared to history?
So we don't think that the book of Genesis, I mean, anybody that reads it, it's not written as a historical book, meaning if it was a historical account, it would be much more specific, much more like a history book, saying in this and this year, this and this is what happened, this person was born. And the historical events are fact, so they are historical events, but they're framed and presented by God in a way that is going to focus on the morality, the values, the lessons that we can learn forever, right? For
Mm-hmm.
all of society. And this is, again, we're talking about, thousands of years ago,
Mm-hmm.
right? So for the thousands of years from when Abraham was born, roughly 2,800 and some odd years ago, until now, that society changed and was shaped around these values. And sure, they're presented in a story-like wet manner, and those stories actually happened. And we believe those stories actually happened. We know we have an
Mm-hmm.
accounting of those stories actually happening, and we have very specific details of what happened. But that's still not the point. That's not why, because many other things happened that were not in the Bible,
Mm-hmm.
right? So the history is not the essence of
Yeah, it's
why
not
it's
the
there.
it's not the key component of the book of
Exactly.
Genesis, not history,
Exactly.
because the stories are so. I mean, the first stories of the Garden of Eden and then the story of Noah are so abrupt. It's almost like you can understand they didn't have a lot of paper or tablets to be writing on because they had to tell the story really quick and get in and out. And it's so you read it and you're like, there's a lot here to unpack. And the more you read it at different stages of your life, and this is what I'd encourage to our listening audience, read the book, try to understand it, then go and start doing the research about the different interpretations.
Sure.
Because I've read, so this is the third time I've read the Bible, and so I want to direct you to one particular passage in Genesis because I've been thinking about this a lot, especially in the context of all these other things going on in what we're learning about archaeology and what we're learning about ancient civilizations is in the book of Genesis. Of course, you have the story of Adam and Eve and eating the forbidden fruit. Eve ate the fruit. She gave it to Adam. Their eyes were opened. Then they knew the difference between good and evil. And then they had dominion over all the animals. When their eyes were opened, do you interpret that as the beginning of consciousness?
So, no. I mean, if you read the Bible and the story until that point in time, are you suggesting they were not conscious?
That no, perhaps that they only knew good. They were created by God directly. They were the first humans, but we're the mystery of consciousness, that how we have this spark of consciousness and we know good from evil. The animals do not. Even other hominids
Hmm.
at that are in ancient archaeology perhaps did not, but
Hmm.
they were given this divine spark. They were created in the likeness of God. Is that consciousness? Is that what separated them from the animals?
So I guess we have to define the term consciousness because, being conscious and being
Yeah,
alive and
by
being awake.
consciousness, I would say it's the unique human ability to understand and discern right from wrong,
So
good
moral
from evil,
values.
moral values,
Yeah.
the beginning of that.
Having control over morality.
Mm-hmm.
So, um, if God told Adam and Eve not to eat from this particular tree, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they did, and then they got punished for it, right? And again, that's a very simplistic kind of way of talking about this story that really affected all of mankind, that all of mankind is from,
Mm-hmm.
is coming out of. Um, that means that they were able to have right and wrong and choose wrong prior to eating. Okay, because they did choose the wrong one, right?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Okay.
Yeah.
However, the Bible does say very clearly that they changed after they ate from the that tree of knowledge, tree of
Mm-hmm.
wisdom, however you translate that to English. So, what we understand, what is explained in our text about that particular, and it's very there's a lot of depth to that. So I'm just going to kind of give you the surface level, just so we can understand something from that story.
Mm-hmm.
Is that really, you know, good and evil could coexist in a separate domains. Okay, so I could have evil over here and good over here, and I can make sure that that evil doesn't come into my domain. And that's part of our job as human beings, is that we actually see evil all around us, and we have a responsibility to make sure not to let that evil inside.
Mm-hmm.
Right now, what happened after Adam and Eve ate from that tree? They actually took the evil and incorporated it inside of themselves. And all of mankind is a result of that. As a result of that, has two components, primary components that make us go all day. Right? This is what define us as human beings. And you called it maybe consciousness, morality. It's actually two wills inside of us at all times. One pushing us to do good, and one pushing us to do evil. And our job is to turn the evil into a um, to be subservient to the good. So we
Mm-hmm.
should use the evil, right? The evil inclination, as I would call it, and use that and turn it around so that it can be subservient to the good and actually do good things with it. Like we should be in control. Our good should be so good that it takes that evil drive, the drive that, again, and the word evil doesn't really do it justice, right? It's just, a drive to misuse all of the gifts and all of the strengths and talents that God gave us. Use them for the wrong things.
Huh.
Now let's
Yeah.
take that drive, and that drive is very important because, if we didn't have that drive, I mean, think about it. You didn't have a drive to eat, so you go, you die. You know what I'm saying? But when you do have the drive to eat, that drive to eat turns into this self satisfying, self fulfilling drive, and then it can get out of control, and then people could overeat, eat the wrong things, do all sorts of things to, drive for money, drive for sex, drive for all different type of, human nature, human needs
Hmm.
that in and of themselves, they're not necessarily good. But when you attach them to a higher purpose, then they can all of a sudden be, amazing.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I actually haven't looked at it that way. I kind of look at it like the world of our consciousness is divided between good and evil, and we have to be, like you said, subservient to good. But I don't know how you harness the evil intention for good. It's like I haven't thought of it that way, honestly.
Well,
But
let's say you have an ego, okay? Now,
mhm.
is the ego a good thing or a bad thing? In a,
Well, you need
in,
it. You need it to
That's what I'm saying.
function
But
in the
in a
world. Yeah.
vacuum, if you look at a guy, if you're like, oh, that guy's egotistical, like what do you mean? It's not such a compliment, right?
No.
That
Yeah.
guy's an egomaniac, like that's not a good thing, right?
Hmm.
But you need the ego to help you to protect yourself, to, exist, the sense of self. So
Hmm.
you use it for a sense of existence, and then you do with that, a lot of good things.
Yeah, that's interesting. Because I kind of look at it like I learned about the seven deadly sins, and most of those sins have to do with satisfying your instant gratification, your um, wrath, lust, envy, um, greed, avarice, pride. I mean, it's basically inflating your need for instant gratification and inflating your ego, and you're tempted by these evil inclinations all the time, and you need to essentially be in prayer to not be I guess taken over by those inclinations and have those destroy your life. And and in the Christian world, we pray for the Holy Spirit to help us stay on the right path. We pray that God's Spirit take over our conscious way of thinking, and that we align our will with God's will. Is that the same for the Jewish faith?
I mean, aligning our will with God's will is definitely the same. I think that that is something that is, the Bible brought out certain basic morals and values that were not at all normal at those times, right? It was normal to have human child sacrifice. It was
Yeah.
normal to have multiple idols and deities and gods that you served in all different ways, and you took advantage of other people in order to serve those gods. And then those gods themselves had all sorts of, probably all of those, characters that you just talked about, a minute ago. All those seven were, each
Hmm.
one of them was another god, probably. Like then society shifted, and it took a very long time for society to shift, right? But society shifted to a place where kindness was actually valued. Kindness was a moral that was, necessary and important. So I think prayer is a tool that you can kind of step out of yourself and ask for help from a higher power. There's no question, and prayer is a necessary tool. But I also believe that we have the power to choose good over evil. Every single individual has that power inside of themselves, and you can surrender that power. But that is in Judaism, in the Torah. That's the definition of a human being,
Yeah.
the one who can choose between right and wrong.
And another thing that I think has happened in our world today is I love how Alexander Solzhenitsyn puts it: the line between good and evil exists in every human's heart. And to make an assumption that because this particular person or these people have this certain belief, that they're all evil, I think misses the boat on that. That no,
The the
everybody's
belief could be evil.
the
The specific belief that they have, or if you're saying,
yeah
oh, everybody believes in this, and
yeah, they
therefore
could
they're all
be,
evil,
yeah, exactly.
that value is what you want to look at and say that's evil.
Uh-huh. They
Are the
could all be
people evil?
intoxicated by a toxic belief system
Exactly.
that's causing them to do tremendous harm to themselves. And then that's a belief system they've subscribed to. And then I think you could have sympathy for people like that. It's like you I also like the idea that ideas capture people rather than people looking for ideas. Ideas capture a hold of people's hearts, and then they rationalize their decisions based on this ideology they've adopted. And you know, on
Sure.
this program, we're trying to make a divide between the left and the right in this hyper vitriolic environment we live in. And and so it's very difficult when you have two people of opposing belief systems to get on the same page and understand you're both decent people, and you can find a lot of common ground and common values. And it's not like one side's evil and the other side's good. It's like you both possess both good
Yeah,
and evil.
like I said, I think the definition of a human being is someone who has both, good and evil, and has the ability to choose between good and evil.
Mm-hmm.
Unfortunately, we don't always choose good,
Yeah,
but that makes us special. It makes us unique.
yeah. I I've been thinking about how, and so I also read through this book of Genesis, and there was a very confusing passage to me, and I've read so many interpretations of it, and I'd like to get your take on it. It's in Genesis 6, I believe it's verse 2. It's the sons of God saw the daughters of men and married them and had children with them. And you look at all the previous verses in Genesis to figure out, okay, who are the sons of God and who are the daughters of men, and what's being referred to here. And then I searched online before this program to try to get, because I was just thinking about it in my head, and my immediate interpretation with what I've been learning about in the whole podcast realm and YouTube is that perhaps there were people on earth before the Garden of Eden, and those people perhaps were just like animals. They didn't have the light of consciousness. They weren't the children of God. Perhaps they were the children of evolution. Maybe they were hominids. But anyway, that was where my mind went when I first read that passage. That's not an interpretation I found anywhere on the internet. But how do you
You could
interpret
write
that?
it, and then it would be on the
Yeah,
internet.
then it would be.
Then the next guy in the podcast will go, "I found this interpretation."
Yeah,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
it's like obviously mankind was not created 2,800 years ago. That wasn't the very beginning of mankind if you look at, or if you begin to believe, Darwinian evolution. But
Abraham was born around
oh,
2,000 years
Abraham.
ago.
Okay. When was the Garden of Eden supposed to have
According
existed?
to the biblical account that we have, is 5,785 years ago.
Okay, about roughly over 3,000 years before Abraham was born. But I mean, how do you
2,000, yeah.
reconcile, the ancient archaeological evidence that humans likely existed long before that time period, before the Garden of Eden story, um, with that story and the timeline it exists on.
So look, I don't want to talk about evolution. I think that would be a very long conversation.
Yeah.
The biblical story starts with Adam. Okay, what exactly was the state around him at that time, the state of the world? How was Adam created? Was the world created at in a way that nothing else existed and it was just starting off, or was it actually created as like a complete, creation? Were there worlds before? All of this is discussed in the oral Torah.
Okay.
It's definitely too long of a conversation to
Yeah, and
have.
I don't think it's a productive conversation, because obviously the Bible was written for a different audience at that time, that ancient time. And if you tried to explain to them Darwinian evolution, even at that time, I don't know how you begin to do that. But so,
The point I'm trying to make is that the Bible, when it gives the account of Adam and Eve, it gives the account of the start of the world of the world that we know, the world that we live in,
mhm.
right? When you call it, a conscious human being that has choice between good and evil. um, you know, talking about what was before is not going to be, helpful to the conversation. I think that the purpose of writing about, Adam and Eve, and writing all those verses that are discussed and written in the Bible that we could learn from, is really to pull out the values of morality that we're supposed to live by and we're supposed to create society around.
Mm-hmm.
You and there's plenty to study when if you want to figure out the very specifics of every single verse. There's, in my library at my house, I have thousands of books. You're invited, but
Like what's the primary moral value taught um in the story of Adam and Eve? I mean, what do you like? Give me an example.
I'll give you an example. Okay. So when let's say we're talking about I'm just trying to think of one good example. We could start from the beginning. Okay. Adam and Eve. Adam is commanded to watch over the garden, right? To take care of the garden around him and make sure not to mess it up, right? So he's created and he is put in charge of this beautiful creation around him, right? And he's given a task, he's given a responsibility, and he's supposed to go ahead and take care of everything and make sure that godliness is not pushed to the side, and the ego and the sense of self or what I want is it takes front and center. And that was his job, right? And when we look at it in basic modern terms, right, that means that every person is supposed to actually take responsibility for their surroundings. You're put in a place where you have your family, your friends, your business, all the people that you interact with. You're the Adam of that area in this world, right?
Mm-hmm.
Some people have a much bigger sense of responsibility because they're in a more powerful position. Um, but everybody has that sense of responsibility. Adam was created singular. Why was Adam created singular? Why not create an entire? If as the Bible posits, he was just created, so God could have created many people at the same time, right? Why only one person? And again, so what's the lesson we're supposed to learn from it? The lesson we're supposed to learn from it is, as the Talmud says, the oral tradition teaches us, is that the world, every human being in the world is supposed to say, you know what, this world was actually created for me, but not created for me like I should take everything that I want from it and screw everyone else, but
Mm-hmm.
created for me like I'm responsible, right?
Yeah,
And
you
a
have
person,
dominion over
you
all
have
things.
dominion
Yeah.
over, yeah. And it goes on and on, and coming to the commandment, or with the first time that God told Adam, okay, this is what I want of you, make sure you don't eat from this tree. And actually, he was supposed to eat from the tree of wisdom, and it's brought in the same, a couple verses later, but that he was supposed to first eat from the tree of life. That's what it says in the Bible. And if he would have eaten from the tree of life first, that actually would have been fine for him to eat from the tree of wisdom, of knowledge.
Hmm.
And what that teaches us, again, I'll try to simplify it, is that when you go after your base desire for the sense or the sake of the base desire, right, you are going to mess things up. You are going to destroy. But when you first go after a meaningful life, right, and then you utilize all of those things that you have in your base desire to go ahead and support that meaningful life, right? All of the desires that we have are not bad. They're only bad in a vacuum when you use them for the bad, right? When you use them, all of those characteristics that you mentioned earlier, whether it's jealousy or anger or desire, all
Mm-hmm.
of those things can be used for the good. It's just a matter of where do you position it? Is that the goal, or is that just a tool that I'm supposed to use in certain circumstances? We should hate evil. Does that mean that we should be hateful people? No, but we should use hate to hate evil. We should
Mm-hmm.
fight evil. People lost sight of that. Like, fight evil. Fighting evil is good,
Yeah.
right? You want to be a good person? Part of being a good person is fighting against evil,
Yeah.
right? You can't just look at people, oh, they're fighting. That doesn't mean that they're bad, right? It's a
Mm-hmm.
matter of where you position it.
Yeah. Well, and it's obviously a problem, and probably why our society is so secular, that so many people believe that if you're fighting evil for the sake of good, under a religious pretense, your definition of good might be completely 180 degrees opposite of the opposition's definition of good, and it's hard to discern.
How do you tell? How do you know? I think that everybody really knows who's who's good. I think that like truth really, if you start poking holes at it, like you'll get to the truth.
Yeah,
You
I,
start
I
you could
tend
you
to
can
believe there's objective
you can have a
truth.
narrative that says these people you're fighting, you're both wrong, and you can have a narrative that goes either way. But then once you start actually asking questions, okay, well, what's the reason that you're fighting? Well, what happened before then? Like, who started this fight? Like, why? What are you trying? What's your goal? What are you gaining out of this? Like,
Mm-hmm.
you start investigating a little bit, like it comes clear.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is objective truth, and some people would argue that truth is actually more subjective, and your truth is more important than the truth. And I would totally argue with that.
Yeah,
And
even those people though, like when it comes to like going to court and testifying, they're probably not going to be testifying according to their truth.
yeah,
Like, and if they do, that's perjury. You know what I'm saying? Like,
yeah, they're
so
not going to win.
yeah,
You're going to have a hard time winning if it's your truth as opposed to the truth.
yeah.
And we will talk about that in our third segment, the is current conflict. I don't want to go there quite yet. But I want to take a little break. In our next segment, I want to talk about the rise of the nation of Israel. I want to talk about how Israel was formed in historically from the Bible, and how it is in the state it's in today, and we'll go from there.
Okay.
Okay, we'll take a little break. Clark's Auto is Utah's premier independent Subaru mechanic and auto shop. Check them out at clarksauto.com and on the back of Utah Stories magazine.